Hello and welcome to episode number 44 of Chel Squared. I'm your host, Andrew Chelney, and as usual, we've got a ton to talk about today. Before we get into it here, same spiel every week, but the importance as always at a high level. Please follow the podcast on Twitter at Chel Squared and on Facebook at Chel Squared for more hot takes, news about future guests, poll questions, and a whole lot more. If you want to follow my personal Twitter, it's at Chelney Andrew. Please rate the show if you enjoy listening. It means more to me than I could put into words. And as an incentive, I will give you a shout out on social media and on the podcast if you do so. Every time you either like the show on SoundCloud, give it a rating on iTunes, follow it on Spotify, etc. A puppy gets a hug from its owner. I don't make the rules here, is making sure you are in the know. If you prefer listening to podcasts on YouTube, search Chel Squared Podcast, and the show is there too. The show is everywhere from iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and every other platform you enjoy listening to podcasts on. If Chel Squared isn't on your preferred platform, shoot me a tweet or a DM, and I will put it on there. Though I am a SiriusXM employee, this podcast is not affiliated in any way with the company. The opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone and do not necessarily reflect the views of SiriusXM. If you're angry at my takes, direct them to me and me alone, please and thank you. Wow, has this been an exciting playoff so far? Can you believe what the Columbus Blue Jackets just did? One of the biggest collapses in sports history. A 62-win team swept in the first round by the lowest seed to make it in the conference. We saw the inspirational speech Torts gave to his team during the intermission in Game 1. Years from now, it's going to be very interesting to see what John Cooper said in the locker room during his team's collapse, if anything at all. Should the Lightning make any changes? Should they stay put and hope a losing streak doesn't come at the worst possible time? We'll talk about that. On last week's show, I said Isles in 5 to beat the Pittsburgh Penguins. Friend of the show, Anthony Sandra of Die by the Blade, was surprised, thinking the series could go either way, but it would go at least 6 games. The Islanders completely swept the Penguins in dominating fashion. GM Rutherford today said this was the best blue line the Penguins have ever had. This tells me he didn't watch a game all season. Ah, yes, the star-studded blue line featuring the likes of Jack Johnson and Eric Branson, simply flawless. What could possibly go wrong? Give me a break. The Isles now await the winner of the Washington-Carolina series. Last week I said that they'll beat Washington in the second round and then get beat by Tampa in the ECF. Well, I mean, now with Tampa out, I'm going to have to revisit that take. The Caps playing the Canes right now as we record the episode. The Canes are up 1-0, so it'll be interesting to see how well or how poorly this episode will age. Now, how about the Avs? Ranted in an absolute clap bomb last night to put them up 3-1 over the Flames, who look just slightly better than the Lightning did, which isn't really saying a whole lot. Mike Smith playing well enough, but the team in front of him very much isn't, as they're 1 game away from elimination. Winnipeg and St. Louis deadlocked in a 2-game tie. Game 5 tonight in Winnipeg, pivotal game in what is now a best of 3. Last week also I said the Knights will sweep the Sharks and that Martin Jones will be the biggest factor in that. Well, it might not be a sweep, but it very much looks like the Sharks will go out in 5 games, and Martin Jones has been absolutely brutal. Get this, .838 save percentage, 5.33 goals against average, and a negative 6.12 goals saved above average, according to HockeyReference.com. You've played 4 games. You've already given up around 6 more goals than the average goaltender would in the same scenario. Absolutely brutal. What's worse is San Jose's decision to not trade for a goaltender at the deadline. No Jimmy Howard, not even a Ryan Miller to solidify that position. Trades can make or break a team in the postseason. Take Mark Stone for the Knights, for example. He's got 6 goals, 10 points in that series. Game 5 tonight at 10 Eastern Time. We'll talk why this could be the end for the 2018-19 Sharks. Plus, AV hired in Philadelphia, Joel Quenneville hired in Florida, and Todd McClellan hired in LA. Which of these were the right moves? In my mind, only one team made the right hire, and you could probably guess which team I'm referring to if you've listened to the show before. Now, we'll get into all of that, the poll question, and a whole lot more. Joining me this week is producer for On the Bench at CBS and the host of the Aisle Seat podcast, Mike Carver. Mike, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Andrew, what's going on? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Mike, before we get into the super nitty-gritty here, the New York Islanders held their first Game 1 matchup at Nassau Coliseum in 31 years. Take me through what that meant to the fan base and the organization.
Well, it was huge for the fan base. I mean, you're talking a very long time. I actually said to a lot of my listeners to the podcast, most of you guys weren't even alive the last time that the Islanders of a playoff series. And it was special. It was a big deal going back to the Nassau Coliseum for Game 1. And that place is always pretty nuts when you get into a big stage like that. And being there for a Game 1, it was everything that those people had waited a long time for, that's for sure.
A friend of mine was at that game. Shout out to Shane Blackburn, who's also a part of SiriusXM. He said he was at Game 2, and he was afraid at points that the Coliseum might collapse. I mean, was it really that loud at Nassau?
Yeah, you know what? It gets like that. You know what it is, Andrew? It's one of those buildings that it's still... look, it's not suitable for today's modern professional sports. It just isn't. It's one of those buildings that's still very small. It's very quaint. The noise gets trapped in there. It's also one of these places that, you know, the corporate suits haven't pushed everybody out of the lower bowl. So you have rabid, crazy fans throughout the entire building, and it carries, and they're on top of each other, and it traps the noise. And yes, it gets that in there. There's no question about that.
Well, your team swept the Pittsburgh Penguins, which again, a team that, I mean, they played well in certain parts, but in a couple of games, they scored the first goal, and then immediately right after that, either Jordan Eberle or another Islander would come right back and say, "How do you do?" and either tie the game, and then the Islanders would score again, and then that would be the game. The Islanders would come back and win the game, and then eventually sweep the Penguins in that series. Take me through what you saw in those 4 games, especially on the road in Pittsburgh, as we both know, a very hostile arena, very, very Penguin-friendly place to be. But if you're the away team, it's very difficult to play in. Take me through what you saw out there in those couple of games that let the Islanders not only compete in those couple of games, but come into Pittsburgh, take both games, and sweep the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Yeah, you know, Andrew, the Islanders play a style that really travels anywhere. You know, there was a couple people I've seen say over the last few days, so the Islanders have been playing a playoff style of hockey pretty much all year because they play a defensive style. They want to beat you 3-1, 2-1, 3-2. You know, they don't want to get into a run-and-shoot game. And that stuff plays very well when you're going on the road in the NHL playoffs. And honestly, I know you were just saying that, you know, the Penguin fan, it's a tough place to play. I mean, not because we're going back there 2-0, but the reports that I got, and also talking to some guys that I know in Pittsburgh sports radio, that city has kind of got a little bit too much of winning, you know, lately. You know, there's no such thing as too much winning, but one thing that when you win 2 of the last 3 cups is a first-round series against a team that you automatically think you're better than, you know, maybe you're not as juiced up for it. And all the reports I got in that building was things were a little quiet. Now, that's partially because of the Islanders. Both of those games, the Penguins score goals early in the game, and the Islanders instantly responded. Here are the 2 biggest stats for me, Andrew, in this series. Number 1, for 4 games, the Penguins led for 4 minutes and 51 seconds combined. All 4 games, they led for just under 5 minutes. That's pretty ridiculous when you think about the kind of offensive firepower that the Pittsburgh Penguins had. And the other one for me, which was huge, Sidney Crosby had 1 point. He had 1 point in 4 games. Tom Kuhnhackl, former Penguin, Islander grinder, had more points than Crosby in this series.
Wow. Well, When I was watching that series, and correct me if I'm wrong, it looked like the Penguins' stars weren't on their game. Crosby was fumbling the puck a little bit too much. Malkin also. Letang, especially in Game 4 on that game-tying goal, he tried to stick handle around, I think it was Pellick or Mayfield it was, instead of just dumping the puck around the boards, and then that led to the 2-on-1. It seemed like the biggest names for the Pittsburgh Penguins didn't play well, and it showed in the scoreboard.
Yeah, look, their stars had a really rough series, and I'm not going to say, look, Crosby, it looks bad because he only had 1 point, but I think that for Crosby, you really have to credit the Islanders. I think the Islanders had a game plan for Sidney Crosby, and they played it to perfection. It was basically going to be, this guy has killed us for his entire career. We're going to lock him down, and the guys that they put on him, I mean, Ryan Pulock and Adam Pellick were on him pretty much the whole series. They played outstanding. The fourth line, led by Stacey Zizekic, was on him a lot. Pulock Crosby down. And I thought that he had a lot of good looks in the series. He just got smothered in a lot of spots. For the other guys, though, they don't get off as easy for me, Andrew. You brought him up. I watched this guy for years. He's a great player, possibly a Hall of Famer, et cetera, et cetera. He looked so lazy and disinterested at those 2 games at Nassau Coliseum. I couldn't believe watching the lazy passes he made. He basically gave up and had the turnover that led to the overtime winner in Game 1. He had the one in Game 4, like you talked about, with a home run by him. He looked lazy, disinterested, looked like he didn't care. He said today that he was healthy, or yesterday, whatever it was. He was healthy. There's nothing wrong with him. You know, I guess I can't make any mistakes. He's a guy, Andrew, that I would not be surprised. If I was the Penguins and you're looking to shake things up a little bit, I would try to maybe see what the market is for Christopher Pang. Now, here's the problem. I make $7.5 million for the next 3 years. So that's going to be a little tough to move. As far as Kessel, I think Kessel was awful, but he seems like the easiest guy that you can move if you're the Penguins as well. And Malkin also was lazy. Malkin cried after that game, too, at the Coliseum, complained about the ice. He took 2 really bad frustration penalties in that game. I thought that Malkin and Letang were the 2 guys that really let the Penguins down in that series.
Wow. So if you're GM Rutherford, right? I mean, obviously this is not getting any better with him coming out today and saying and suggesting that this is the best blue line the Penguins have had, which which tells me that he hasn't watched them play at all, because if he did watch them play, he would very much see that no, they were terrible, and by adding Goodbranson to the mix, he has made them even worse. Now, by saying that they have the best blue line is a big red flag for me, honestly. If you're a Penguins fan, listen to that after watching them play for the past 4 games. I can't see how you would see eye to eye with GM Rutherford right now. But let's say you were GM Rutherford, you have Crosby who's not getting any younger, Malkin not getting any younger, Kessel in the mix, Letang in the mix. You have a lot of these guys who are still very good at what they do, but they're not 26, 27-year-olds anymore, and you are looking to make maybe one last push at another cup. What would be the best moves for you to make in Pittsburgh for you to get back to the playoffs and maybe do a better job than be swept?
Well, look, first of all, let me get to what Rutherford said, because if Rutherford thinks that, which he clearly today said he does, that's a major problem. You said red flag to the Pittsburgh Penguins right now. You can't be thrilled listening to him say that, because let's be honest here, his defense, they looked slow. Okay, that's what they did, not just in this series, but all year. Defense was their problem. When they won those 2 cups a couple years ago, they were quicker on D, they moved the puck better, they were just a faster overall unit. And now, it's almost like, and I heard one of the guys at Pittsburgh say this the other day, it's almost like those couple series with the Capitals where Tom Wilson was beating them around. It's almost like Rutherford said, oh, I got to get bigger and tougher to have tougher guys on D. And when you go for tougher guys, you're going to take away speed, and you're going to get slower. And that's what the Penguins have done here. They are a slower hockey team on the blue line, and it showed against the Islanders. What can they do? It's hard because those guys, like you said, they're into their 30s now. They've won cups, but now you have to try to find a way to, you're not getting rid of Sidney Crosby and getting Malkin.
Right.
They're going to be part of your team. The other guys, I would absolutely consider it to try to rebuild in some way. They got a lot of contracts also. They're very hard to move. That Jack Johnson contract is embarrassing.
Terrible.
They've got Patrick Hornquist on the hook. For what, like 5.5 for another 4 or 5 years? He had 3 goals in his last 39 games for the Penguins. So they've got some contracts there that are going to be tough. I think they need to find a way to get quicker on the blue line, and they need to rebuild their third and fourth line, because we saw this a few years ago when the Blackhawks won all those cups. Okay? Now, obviously, they had to pay Taves and Kane and Duncan Keith and all those guys. But what happened when they paid all those guys and those guys got a little bit older? All those third and fourth third line role players for the Blackhawks and those second and third pairing defensemen, what happened to them all? The Blackhawks had to get rid of them because they couldn't pay them. Guys wanted to get paid for winning cups. Guys get older. Now the Blackhawks are starting to rebuild a little bit with those guys that won them cups with some younger players. And that seems to be the kind of formula that maybe the Penguins are going to have to look at if they want to get another cup out of Crosby and Malkin.
And speaking of moves, the Tampa Bay Lightning got swept. I mean, this is going to lead to my poll question in a minute here, but the Tampa Bay Lightning, 62 wins, complete and utter collapse in the first round, devastatingly swept by the Columbus Blue Jackets. I mean, of all the major sports leagues, it seems like hockey is the quote unquote fairest of them all in terms of, I guess, any team could potentially knock out the bigger seed. You are not going to see the Golden State Warriors be knocked out by the Clippers this year, although they did get a game. I doubt the Clippers are going to get 3 more, but that'll
be the only game to get.
Yeah, I mean, and even then, they came back from 31 points down, and the Golden State Warriors love giving up things with the numbers 3 and 1 with them after losing a 3-1 series lead in the 2016 championships. Anyway, this is one of the biggest collapses in sports history. This leads into my poll question, which I tweeted out earlier today. The poll question got almost 80 votes. The poll question was, taking into consideration the level of expectations each team had going into the postseason, what's the biggest collapse in recent sports history? Now, my 4 choices were the Lightning getting swept in round 1 this year, this year's Duke team losing in the Elite Eight, I have the 2016 Warriors blowing the 3-1 lead in the finals, and the 2017 Falcons losing to the Pats in the Super Bowl. Which of these 4, before I tell you, is the winner here in the poll, which would you have chosen?
It has to be the Falcons. It has to be. There's nothing. Look, I get what the Lightning did. It's absolutely stunning. I was shocked by it. We all were. But when you're up on the Patriots in the second half of the Super Bowl, and you're up by that much, you absolutely cannot lose that game. And the Falcons absolutely did everything in that game to give it to the Patriots, whether it be not running the football or just making silly plays. I think it's hands down the Falcons blowing it against the Patriots.
There's a great case, I would say, to be made for all of these 4 choices, right? The Lightning are the favorite in this poll with 59% of the poll. Second place is the Falcons, or 22%. The Warriors in third place with 14%, and Duke in fourth at 4%. I feel like Duke should have a little bit more than 4% here, considering the amount of talent they had on that team. They were far and away the best team in the country, and yet they didn't even make the Final Four. I mean, that's a huge collapse for Duke. Golden State, obviously, I mean, you're up 3-1 in the finals. You have won 73 games in the regular season. You are clearly far and away the best team, and you let the Cavs, led by LeBron, to not only come back to just kill you and win in Game 7 to win the championship. I mean, that was an utter collapse. And for the Falcons, I mean, yeah, you're totally on the money. You were up 25 points in the third quarter, and not only does it look great for you, the bets are off. There's such a, it has never happened before in history, and yet you let that happen, and it all four of those I feel like you could argue for it being a bigger collapse, because each of the four just has its own set of things associated with each of those teams that suggests there is no way you should be in that situation, and yet you let yourself be in that situation.
Yeah, the only one out of those four that I would probably separate and not put them is the Duke one, and the only reason why is, and you're right, Duke was absolutely the favorite. They were a dominant team with dominant guys who are going to be in the NBA. But the NCAA tournament is really a tricky thing. Winning those 6 games is very hard to do. It's a one and done. You got one shot, and you could come out that night and not make shots or not make threes, or the ball doesn't bounce your way. And Duke, it's not like Duke lost to, if they would have lost that second round game to UCF, I think I would have been a little harder on them.
Which they should have. They should have lost that game.
They should have lost that game, and they should have. You could make a case they probably should have lost the Virginia Tech game.
Yep.
But they lost to Michigan State. It was a good game. They played well. Michigan State played really well. That's the hard part about the one and done. So I can't go collapse, because for me a collapse is, like you say, the Warriors being up 3-1 and losing, that's a collapse. The Lightning not even getting off the deck and losing 4 in a row to what's essentially the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference, that's a pretty big collapse when you win 62 games. And being up 28-3 in the Super Bowl in the second half, that's a collapse. I mean, it's not like Duke was up, 20 on Michigan State in the second half and blew that game. That was a tight game all the way through. And they lost a one-and-done game to Michigan State. So I'd probably put Duke a little bit further away from those others.
Very, very fair arguments to make. I mean, again, there's so many moving parts, right, to each and every collapse that we're talking about. I would classify Duke as a collapse only because they were far and away the best team. They should have made at least the Final Four. If they lose in the Final Four, lose the championship, all right. I wouldn't say it's acceptable, but at least it's more understandable given the circumstances. To not even make the Final Four with the roster that they had, with the coaching staff that they have, I would classify that as a collapse because of everything that they had going for them, and they should have been out way prior to the Elite Eight to begin with. I mean, that whole situation is a disaster. I mean, I'm a Syracuse guy who went to Syracuse, graduated from Syracuse, and my freshman year, when they made the Final Four in the 15-16 season, they shouldn't have even made the tournament, and they made the Final Four. Their roster clearly not nearly as good as Duke's roster was, and there's a lot of examples that you could say, oh well, this team made the Final Four and Duke didn't. You could list a lot of teams like that, but at the end of the day, Duke should have at least made the Final Four.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with that. I mean, they were hands down the favorite all year. They should have gotten there, but look, it's just it's a one-night thing. It's a one-night thing where it can happen. It's happened to a lot of great teams in that tournament. Better teams than Duke it's happened to. I know that Duke is an all-world. Zion Williamson, Barish, the whole deal. I get it, but that is a tricky thing. To win that tournament is very hard. And to get through those 6 games without having some close calls. And Duke had a bunch, and it finally caught up with them. The NCAA tournament's very tricky.
You're absolutely right. Well, Duke can't make trades, but the Tampa Bay Lightning very well can. And the idea that some people have thrown on social media, which there's pros and cons to, right? There's one part of Lightning Twitter saying, keep everybody and just hope that the week-long skid that every team eventually has to face doesn't happen in the first round of the playoffs. And then there's the other part of Bolt's Twitter that is yelling about firing John Cooper, trading one of the big guys, finding someone else to fill that hole. I would say that at least for the next season, For me, if I was Steve Yzerman, is to hold on to everybody and make one more push, right? Because you won 62 games, you had your first losing streak all season come at the worst possible time for your team. Sure, should it have happened? Absolutely not, especially to a team of that caliber. But losing streaks do happen, and for the Lightning, it happened in Game 1 of the postseason. And I feel like if this time next season, if they come in with the exact same roster, that kind of thing isn't going to happen.
Look, I think that they will probably bring the same crew back next year. They probably won't make any changes. If I was them, I probably would tinker a little bit. You got to remember, this is a big collapse. Having this whole world regular season and then getting swept in the first round, it's embarrassing. But this same team, has been together for a few years under John Cooper, and they have had some bad flameouts in the postseason. They lost to the Capitals last year. They were up in the series. They had a chance to go to the Stanley Cup final. Year before that, they lost to the Penguins. Similar spot. Had a chance to go to the Stanley Cup final. They lost the final to the Blackhawks a couple years ago. This team has been on the door a few times, and they have not gotten it done, which is why I was not that full force going into the Lightning that they were going to walk to the Stanley Cup finals. Now, a couple people talked me into it towards the end of the year. No, you don't understand. This is a historic team. Nobody's beating them. Blah, blah, blah. I should have stuck with my gut. And listen, I would have never picked them to get swept in the first round, to lose in the first round. But my initial thought the whole year was, these guys never get it done in the playoffs. And even though they're having this historic regular season, there's a good chance they don't get it done again. But I never thought it would be that bad.
So what would you do? What kind of, you said you would do some tinkering. Well, what kind of tinkering did you have in mind?
I mean, look, it's tough. There's probably a couple guys. Listen, you're keeping your core, obviously. The Kucherovs and the Hedmans. And, Vasilevsky, he's going to win the Vezina. I'm not saying get rid of him, but I don't think that he's as good as his numbers tell you. I think he got aided a little bit this year by playing for a really strong team in front of him. I would try to get a little bit more playoff experience from guys who maybe score some big goals in the postseason. Kind of add those guys to their third and fourth lines. They acquired Ryan Callahan a few years ago, and they have never gotten the Ryan Callahan that the Rangers had, who was a guy who was very gritty in the postseason. He scored goals in the postseason, big ones. Maybe didn't fill the stat sheet in the regular season, but I like guys like that in the playoffs. And I don't know if the Lightning are filled with a lot of guys like that. So I would look for players like that, like a Justin Williams. Unfortunately, they need Ryan Callahan like the Ryan Callahan from 2 years before they traded for him. Ryan Callahan's finished now. He's got nothing left. But they need a player like that who has some heart, some grit, some playoff experience of scoring big goals. Those are the kind of guys that I think they need, because just having the big stars, it just hasn't gotten it done the past couple of years.
Can't argue with that. You would give Vasilevsky the Vezina over Ben Bishop, or do you think Ben Bishop should take it over Vasi?
I would give it to Ben Bishop in a heartbeat. If I had a vote, Ben Bishop would get it. But I do not, and I know that the people who do, and they're going to give it to Vasilevsky.
Oh, boy.
They're going to give it to him.
I mean, Bishop's, even if you look at the box score on most games, Ben Bishop has better stats than Vasilevsky. Not taking anything away from Vasilevsky, because he had a great regular season. But Ben Bishop, you take a look at what he's done in the 2018-19 season as a 32-year-old goaltender in this league. I mean, he did absolute wonders for the Stars. And I touched upon this last week as well. If Ben Bishop wasn't the goaltender for the Dallas Stars, now Hudobin did very well also in his backup role, but if it wasn't for Ben Bishop, the Stars wouldn't even be close to the playoffs. Vasilevsky had 39 wins this season. I mean, obviously that's great. Only 10 losses, 4 overtime and shootout losses, .925 save percentage, 2.4 goals against average, and according to hockeyreference.com, has saved almost 26 and a half goals saved above average for the season, which is a very high number. But Ben Bishop has 27 wins in a little bit less games. He played 46 games this season. He was injured a little bit throughout the season. 934 save percentage.
Yeah, no, I said that I said Bishop's always hurt. I mean, it's one thing that if there's a knock on Ben Bishop, and this goes back to even when he was in Tampa and even now his past 2 years in Dallas, I mean, he's always hurt, Ben Bishop.
That's true.
That's his big Achilles heel for him. I honestly, look, like you say, he played 45 games, okay, or 44 games, whatever it was that Bishop played. I thought that he was better than Vasilevsky. You take a look at the two guys from the Islanders. What hurts them, and when you talk about Vezina, is they split the games down the middle, so it's hard to pick one guy over the other when it comes to the Isles. Vasilevsky has got that, he played so many games and he's historic win totals, and they're giving it to Vasilevsky. I think they're better goaltenders than him this year, but Vezina has always been a raw stats, kind of award, and they're going to give it to him. They factor wins. Maybe they should start, kind of like what's happened with the Cy Young in baseball. Maybe wins shouldn't be that big of a deal in the Vezina voting anymore.
Well, Vasi only played 53 games this season. Bishop has played 46, although Vasi, of course, had some more wins coupled onto that. But according to HockeyReference.com, goals saved above average for Ben Bishop. Now, keep in mind, Vasi's number was around 26.5. Ben Bishop's goals saved above average number is 32.24. I mean, this is a superstar caliber season for a 32-year-old goaltender who was bounced around the league after being traded from Tampa Bay. He got traded from Tampa to LA, only played for a couple of games there, then went to Dallas and had a pretty solid season in last season for the Dallas Stars, but nothing too spectacular. And now this season at age 32 has had the best season of his career.
I'd give it to him. I think that Bishop should win the Vezina this year. I've seen how these things have gone in the past, and I just got a feeling that all these guys are going to be. Now, I think the Vezina one might be voted by the GMs. There's one of them that's voted by the GMs. There's one that's done by the hockey writers. They all one's done by the broadcasters. Every award has a different group that votes for it. I'm pretty sure the Vezina's GMs, but they'll give it to Vasilevsky. We know, Andrew, that Bishop deserves it. We know.
We do. Fingers are crossed for Ben Bishop to win. I've got my rabbit's foot, and I've got everything that I need to get Ben Bishop his Vezina. But you're right. I hope it happens. But Vasi's got the better wins, and if he wins it, I mean, he was very good. But you take a look at Ben Bishop and you say, how can you not give it to the best goaltender in the league, who for this season was Ben Bishop? But it remains to be seen who gets it in June in Vegas at the awards. But hopefully, fingers crossed, it'll be Ben Bishop. For the San Jose Sharks, though, they have a huge goaltending problem. I mean, I don't know how you felt about this at the deadline, but I feel like the entire NHL almost was screaming at San Jose to get a decent goaltender, because Martin Jones wasn't great all year, Aaron Dell wasn't great all year, and they won their fair amount of games to carry them into the playoffs. But now it's the playoffs, and Jones is getting absolutely embarrassed. Dell is getting embarrassed. The team doesn't look good. They should have gotten at least like a Jimmy Howard or a Ryan Miller or someone of that capacity to at least solidify the goaltending position. They didn't do that. They got Gus Nyquist instead. And what happened? Well, now they're down 3-1. Game 5 is tonight. And if I don't bet, I'm not a betting man, but if I were to bet, I would put a lot of money on Vegas winning Game 5.
Yeah, I think Vegas finishes it off tonight. Vegas has absolutely blitzed them here in these last 3 games. Martin Jones has been awful. I'm with you. I think they should have made a deal. I was a little surprised for all the things that they did in the past year. Even going back to last year's trade deadline, whether it be Evander Kane and then getting Erik Karlsson before the season, getting Nyquist, a lot of moves, and they have a lot of guys also who have been there a long time, whether it be your Thorntons and Pavelskis. They probably should have shored up the goaltending, gotten a little bit more of a veteran presence, somebody who's done it in the playoffs. I know Ryan Miller isn't the same player that he's been, in the past when he was, Captain America, goaltender for Team USA in the Olympics, all in a Buffalo version of Ryan Miller, but you never know. He can find it again in the playoffs. I probably would have took a chance with him if I could have got my hands on him. Even if Jimmy Howard would have been a nice little security blanket, a little bit of an upgrade. I thought they did a bad job there because they've had Jones for a few years now, and he never gets it done. It's just that simple. They have not gotten it done with Jones as the goalie. So the Sharks are going to look back on this. They thought this was kind of like an all-in year for them, and we'll see how it goes for them. They're going to have a lot of decisions in the offseason.
Carlson, of course, is a UFA at the end of the season. He hasn't looked terrific, and I would very much assume that whatever ailed him in the last few weeks of the regular season where he wasn't playing a lot hasn't gone away. I'm almost positive that he is playing on a hobbled leg or hobbled something because he does not look like the Erik Karlsson that we all know and love from the Ottawa Senators. Now, it remains to be seen if he's staying in San Jose, if he is planning on going somewhere else, but he hasn't looked good, and Joe Thornton's not getting any younger. Pavelski's not getting any younger. Vlasic has looked real bad for the majority of the season. He in my mind has been one of the most underrated players throughout his career. I mean, you don't simply make Team Canada unless you are the elite of the elite. And Vlasic has made Team Canada for the Olympics multiple times. So clearly he has something going for him if he's going to do that. But with that said, this season, he has not looked good. And in the playoffs, in the times that he has played, he hasn't looked good then either.
No, he has not. He's had a really rough time in these playoffs. Like I said, I think he's a good player. He just recently, he has not looked good at all. Karlsson, it is what it is. The guy's been hurt all year. And he's another guy who has a lot of injury problems. It happened to him a lot in Ottawa as well. He was hurt a lot in Ottawa. He played through it that one year in the playoffs where they got to the East Finals. Year they beat the Rangers and they lost to the Penguins, I believe, in the East Finals. But he's always had a little bit of an injury problem. I expect him to be back in San Jose next year. I don't think you make that kind of impact trade without knowing that you can get the job done and get him re-signed. But look, he's got to be a little concerned with how things went with him this year in terms of the injury bug. And he's not right. I mean, you watch him in this series, he's clearly still hurt. And they'll tell you that once the series is over, that he played injured in the series, et cetera, like all these guys do. And, Vlasic, same thing. He's a good player. That's another team that I think could look a little bit different next year because this is another time where they make the playoffs, second year in a row, they're going to get ousted by the Vegas Golden Knights. They might look to make a couple of changes.
And how about the Calgary Flames? They look terrific all year. My only concern going into the playoffs was the goaltending with Mike Smith and David Rittich, but Mike Smith has looked, for the most part anyway, as a very solid goaltender in between the pipes for the Calgary Flames, and yet the team in front of him, almost as if just collectively forgot how to play hockey for the majority of this series, and at times just don't look like the Calgary Flames of the regular season. One of the biggest things was last night in Game 4, where the Flames went up 2-0. You think, okay, well, the Flames are finally going to finish this one off and then head back to Calgary, series tied, and yet they give up both goals in the final 10 or so minutes of the third period, and then give up a cross-ice pass to Mikko Rantanen, who gives an absolute clap bomb of a shot past Mike Smith's glove, and all of a sudden the Colorado Avalanche, a team that almost didn't make the playoffs, they were in a complete foot race with the Arizona Coyotes almost to the last day of the season to see who was going to make it to the postseason. And now it kind of looks like the roles have been reversed here. The Avalanche are firing on all cylinders. you have the top players playing extremely well. You have Landeskog playing well, Rantanen playing well. Obviously, Nate McKinnon, one of the best players in the league, playing absolutely out of his mind right now. And it looks fantastic for them. Meanwhile, in Calgary, they look good for a couple minutes at a time. They score a goal. You think, okay, Calgary's finally got it together. And the next thing you know, they blow the lead, and then they blow the game. I mean, the Avalanche are one game away from stunning the Calgary Flames, and now we're going to see both top teams in the conferences about to be knocked out of the first round of the playoffs. I mean, that is huge. Absolutely huge.
Yeah, Andrew, I picked the Avalanche to win this series before the playoffs started.
Wow.
I have not been a believer in the Calgary Flames all year. I thought the Avalanche would beat them. And the reasons why I thought is, you just brought it up. I have zero confidence in Mike Smith and their goaltending situation. And it is pretty bizarre that Smith has been really good for them, especially last night in that Game 4. Smith was excellent. They gave him no help. I'm a little surprised that the Calgary forwards have not done their part, because I knew that they could score. I thought that their downfall would be goaltending, and that Mike Smith would be the reason why they were going to go home in this series. Because the Avalanche can blitz you with that top line. That McKinnon, Landeskog, Rantanen, they can blitz you, and I thought that they would get to Smith enough that they would win this series. Now, it turns out that Smith's been good, but the Avalanche is still going to get it done here. I don't see them losing 3 in a row to the Calgary Flames. I just didn't think all year that the Flames, I thought that if they played a series against, whether it be Vegas, San Jose, Nashville, Winnipeg, I didn't think that they were as good as those teams. I know they ran it up in the regular season and they had the best record, but I thought they were a very weak one seed in the Western Conference.
So, let's say Vegas and Colorado both win their Game 5s, and then it'll be Colorado and Vegas in round 2. Who would you take in that series?
Vegas. I think Vegas is the best team in the West right now. I think Vegas is going to the Cup final.
Really? Again? Wow.
Put together, I think they're going back, which I don't really ever do. I think it's very hard when you lose in the Stanley Cup final. It is hard to get all the way back to that point a year later. Especially, look, we know the unbelievable story that it was last year, an expansion team making it all the way to the Stanley Cup final. But here's the thing. That team made it last year, and they are about 10 times better than the team that went. Adding Stastny, adding Pacioretty, adding Stone at the deadline, those were huge moves for this team. They are a lot better than the team that went last year. So I think the Knights are going back. I know that they sputtered for a lot of the year, but once they got Stone at the deadline, they turned it on. And once they knew they were locked into that 3, it basically didn't play for the last 2.5 weeks of the season. That's why, their point total was a little lower than it probably should have been. But I think they're the best team in the West right now. I think they beat the Avalanche. In fact, I think they're going to get a break, because I thought that their matchups with Calgary this year, Calgary seemed to play them very well. So I think they're going to get a break that Colorado's going to take Calgary out. I think that they'll whack Colorado. That won't even be a long series. They'll take care of Colorado fast. And then they'll beat whoever comes out of that mess in the central side of the bracket. And they're going to go back to the Stanley Cup final. Wow.
Well, I did have Vegas go into the Western Conference final. I did have them beating Calgary in the second round. But I did in the show last week when we did the predictions, I did have St. Louis beating Vegas to get to the Cup final. Now that series is tied at 2. You have Nashville and Dallas tied at 2. You have Pekka Rinne giving up 4 goals on 8 shots in the first period of that game last night. I mean, I've been trashing Pekka Rinne for as long as I can remember in the playoffs. I mean, I said this before, I'll say it again. Pekka Rinne could win all 82 games in the regular season for all I care. I don't care how many games he wants to win from October to the beginning of April. I don't care, because once he gets to the postseason, it's almost like you see a whole different side of Pekka Rinne, and time again, he just decides, or he can't, or he just flat out can't match the intensity at the playoff spring. He did have a great, first couple of games, but Game 4 on the road, 4 goals, 8 shots. We've seen that multiple times for Pekka Rinne, where he is very good at home, usually very good at home, and then he gets away from Nashville, and it's all of a sudden like he's like this is a local YMCA goaltender in the crease here. I mean, it's not a good look for Pekka Rinne. He's in his mid-30s, closer to 40 now than 30. And for Nashville, even if they do win this series, whoever wins in the Winnipeg-St. Louis series is going to take Nashville out, I think, relatively easily.
Well, look, I feel like these 4 teams are very similar. I thought that Winnipeg and Nashville would be a little bit ahead of the other 2 this year. I think they're better teams, but I really hated how Winnipeg and Nashville came down the stretch. You're right about Rinne. He could be a problem when you get to this point of the season. Aside from the year where they went to the finals against the Penguins, and even he had a couple of tough ones in that series, Rinne has been a guy who's had his problems in the playoffs. I still think that Nashville and Winnipeg will find a way in these 2 series. Dallas blitzed them in Dallas, of course, last night. Dallas is the more of the defensive team, the structured team. I just feel like Nashville is a little bit better than them, and they have the 2 more games in their house. I think that Nashville will find a way. It might take 7, but I think Nashville will find a way, and I think the other series is just as tight. I think that St. Louis, who, as we all know, was left for dead on January 1st. I mean, they were absolutely finished, and the job that Berube did getting these guys back in the mix to the point where they almost won the division the last week of the season. But I never, ever trust the St. Louis Blues in the playoffs. Never. They never get it done as well. I never trust them. Look at this series. Take this series as an example. They go to Winnipeg, right? This tough place to play, crazy crowd, yada, yada, yada. They go to Winnipeg. They win the first 2 games of the series. And what do the Blues do? They go home and they lose both games in their house. That is typical St. Louis Blue playoff hockey. So now they're in a best out of 3 with 2 of the games there. Winnipeg isn't going to lose 4 games at home in this series. It's not going to happen. So St. Louis is going to have to find a way to win 1 more game there and win their home game. I don't think they can do it. So I like Winnipeg and I like Nashville to both get this done in 7.
Fair point. How about Boston and Toronto? So, which of the 2 teams, which do you think is going to live after these games? Because after some of these hits and some of the things that have happened in this series, I mean, it's whoever makes it to the second round. I mean, Columbus is not going to have an easy matchup, right? But you have to think that they're going to have a little bit of an easier time because either Boston's going to kill Toronto or Toronto's going to kill Boston, and the either team is going to hobble its way almost into the second round of the playoffs.
Yeah, this is a very interesting series. It's the 3rd year in a row that they're playing in the first round, and they obviously can't stand each other, as you can tell by how crazy the series has been. I thought coming into this series that Toronto, they just don't have that feel to me as the type of team that I like to back in the playoffs. I don't think that they're very tough. I think they're a bit of a soft team. I was watching them a bunch of times this year, including the games against, obviously, the Islanders. I thought Toronto was very soft and that their style of play, trying to play some pond hockey, that doesn't really translate to the playoff game. But they've surprised me in this series. I think they've come out, they've played very well. The series is all even now. They've shown they can win in Boston. I still like the Bruins to win this series. When I look at this series from, my perspective of the Islanders and trying to do it, how can the Islanders get to the end? I think that the Bruins are an awful matchup for the Islanders. So if you're an Islander fan, you want the Bruins to get out as much as you hate John Tavares. You want to see the Bruins lose. But I think it's a hard-nosed series that's going to go down to 7. It seems like it has every year. And I think the Bruins will find a way to win this thing in 7 games.
I would agree with you. I picked Boston over Toronto in 7, but that is going to be an absolute bloodbath of a series, and it has been for the past 4 games, and it will be.
And you made it, and you made a great point about Columbus here, because Columbus is going to sit around now for a week, a week plus, waiting for this series to end. They just played, the monumental sweep of the Lightning, and they could sit around while Boston and Toronto are beating each other up, and Torts is going to game plan for either team, and he's going to be ready to go. That could be very tricky. With the way Columbus played in the first round, could be very tricky for the winner of that Boston-Toronto series.
You're absolutely right. And Alex Ovechkin has just tied the game 4, for the Capitals. Now it's 1-1, middle of the second period. Well, he scored from his office. I mean, how can you bet against Alex Ovechkin, his second goal of the playoffs? I mean, this is a pivotal game. The Caps are up 2-1 in the series. For the Islanders, would you rather play Washington or would you play Carolina? And in my opinion, I think you would rather play Washington because you have Barry Trotz, you have Mitch Korn. Both of these guys obviously know Washington's system. They've shown in the regular season that they can beat they can beat the Capitals. And if you're the Isles, I would rather play Washington than play Carolina because, again, Carolina has nothing, they don't have any expectations, right? The Capitals are defending the Cup. They have a lot on their plate. The Carolina Hurricanes are out here trying to show the world that they are for real, that they are here to stay and that you should never count them out. So they are playing very well. The Caps have a lot of pressure on them. So even if the Caps do beat the Hurricanes, I would wager, I said this last week, I'll say it again, that the Islanders would beat Washington, but if they were to play Carolina, it would be a very tough matchup.
Yeah, look, I think that both teams are very good. There's no doubt about that. And it's two very different scenarios when you bring the Islanders into the equation. You make a great point. I've talked about it all year on the Isle Street podcast. I think that with the Capitals in a playoff series, the Barry Trotz factor in that series is going to be off the charts, and he knows that team very well. When that team got off to a slow start, it took them a couple months to get going, the Caps, and I think there was a combination of a few things. I mean, look, they basically spent 4 months hungover after winning that Cup last June. That factors into it. I think everything I think was real for them at the beginning, and not having their coach. I know this just from watching Barry Trotz all year now. That guy makes a huge difference. I know that he does, and they don't have him anymore. And I think it's going to make a difference when they get to the second round if they do. And not only that, for the same reason with Vegas, why I was skeptical about picking them, it is so hard to play into mid-June and then come back and do it all again. I saw what the Penguins did a couple years ago, winning 2 in a row. It's just monumental to win back-to-back in this sport. It is so hard to win those 16 games 2 years in a row. You would have to think at some point this is going to catch up with Washington. You just have to think it, and I think that Barry Trotz would have a really good game plan to go out and play them. Carolina, they're a very, very, very good team. I know that they haven't been in the playoffs in a long time. This is a team that can get very high octane with you. They've got some really good players. Now the Islanders, kind of like the Penguins, they haven't seen Carolina in a long time. They played them 3 times in October out of their 4 times. So the Islanders and the Hurricanes both have changed their games throughout the course of the season. I think it would be very interesting to see them both play again now because it's been so long since they've played. And the Islanders would have home ice if they played the Carolina Hurricanes, which is also a bit of a difference, but either matchup is going to be tough. When you look at it from the Islanders' perspective with me, I just want them both to go 7 games and beat up each other. That's what I want to see.
You have Vegas going to the final. Who from the Eastern Conference do you have going to the final? Now I know your biases here, and everyone has a bias. But if be as neutral as possible here, if Vegas is going to the West, who's going from the East, and who is winning the Stanley Cup this season?
Well, I had Tampa going out of the East,
like everyone else, right?
I had Tampa, I had Tampa and Vegas in the Cup final, and I had Tampa beating the Islanders in the Eastern Conference final. As far as what I thought was going to happen there, look. I don't think it's impossible. I think the East is wide open. I don't think it's impossible for the Islanders. I think that if they played Boston, Boston would beat them. If it was Boston Islanders in the Eastern Conference Finals, I think that Boston would go there. but I think the Islanders will win their next round. I think that they'll be in that East final, and it'll be down to who they play. If they play Boston, I think it'll be Boston. If they play Tampa or Toronto or Columbus, I think the Islanders could beat either of those and get there.
So let's say the Islanders do make the final, then and then they have to play the Vegas Golden Knights. Who are you picking? Again, I know you're an Islanders fan, so this is going to be a tough question for you. But realistically, who are you picking?
Islanders, Andrew. Look, and I root Islanders because it's good for the show. That's part of the reason why I root Islanders. I'm not going to kid with you. The show, people get jacked up when the team's playing well. More people listen to the show. It's great for the ILC podcast. I love it. Everybody gets excited. So if I get a nice little round of playoff run here, Andrew, that's a good thing for the show. I do, but I'm always honest about this team. I always am. I tell it like it is with the Islanders. I always have. This is a different Islander team than teams in the past. They've got a lot of things right now working for them. And I've seen all the bad moments in this team's history over the last 25 years. I know it very well. This team has a different feel about it. Whether it's Barry Trotz, he has sold them on the us against the world routine, whatever he has done, this team does not have the same feel. And I saw that even more when they swept the Penguins. If they played Vegas in the final, I think Vegas would. Fair point. I'm not going to argue that. I do have St. Louis beating Vegas in the Western Conference Finals, but again, the series are tied at 2 apiece. That's going to be very, very interesting to see. I initially did have Tampa beating the Islanders in the Eastern Conference Finals just like you did, but with Tampa out, this is tough. Now this is getting to be very tough. I guess I'm going to go all in and say Columbus is going to win it all. Columbus has beaten the 62-win team. If they can beat that team, they can beat anybody, right? I feel like people could argue that now. I don't know how if that's going to happen at all. But again, if Columbus could beat Tampa, then I guess they can beat anybody. Really quick here before I let you go, 3 coaching changes happened recently in the NHL world. Philadelphia hiring AV, the gum chewer, the elite gum chewer that he is. The Florida Panthers hired Joel Quenneville, and the LA Kings hired Tom McClellan. Which of these 3 is your favorite hire? Now, I feel like I can guess which one of the 3, but which is your favorite? Well, it's easy. It's obviously Quenneville. I mean, Quenneville hire is hands down the best one so far. I mean, you're taking a guy who's won cups. You're bringing him down there to that younger team who needs somebody like that. I saw what taking an experienced Stanley Cup winning head coach can do to a team that hasn't done it before. I saw him change the culture in New York this year. I think that Joel Quenneville can do that down in Miami for the Panthers. And I also think that Joel Quenneville is going to have a hand in bringing Artemi Panarin down to the Panthers this summer. So there's definitely a big factor with Quenneville. The other 2 hires, honestly, Todd McClellan, I'm kind of over it. You didn't get it done in San Jose. You didn't get it done in Edmonton. I think that's a bad hire by the Kings. Going with a little retread action with Todd McClellan, who's been up and down the West Coast now, hasn't gotten it done anywhere. I don't like that move at all for them. And with the Flyers, look, AV is a guy who, doesn't probably get as much credit as he should. He wins a lot of games. He gets you to the playoffs every year. His big problem is the same thing a lot of coaches have. He never got it done in the bigger spot. He got to the finals at Vancouver, lost. Got to the finals with the Rangers, lost. Made a couple Eastern Conference finals, lost. So, but for what the Flyers need, they're looking for some stability, some long-term stability. It's possible that Vigneault brings that to him. I thought that Scott Gordon did a nice job there. I'm kind of surprised they didn't give Scott Gordon a chance, but they see a guy who's won as many games as Vigneault has in the NHL. They figure let's try to get some stability here.
I mean, for Coach Q, you're absolutely right on the money. Honestly, if I were to make an early prediction, this might be completely over the top, but I wager that Florida is going to be knocking on the door for the Eastern Conference Finals next season. Joel Quenneville is that coach that could take Barkov, Huberdeau, Ekblad, Yandel. He's going to take all of those guys and lead them to not only the playoffs, but knocking on the door to the Eastern Conference Finals. Are they going to get there, or are they going to win? I mean, obviously it's the middle of April. We don't know at all what's going to happen in 2 weeks. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone what's going to happen a year from now. But if I were to wager a surprise team now that's going to make it far in next year's playoffs, it's going to be the Florida Panthers because of their addition of Joel Quenneville. Now, I said that we talked about this last week on the show. Tal McClellan, if there was one word to summarize his tenure as an NHL coach, it's underachieving. He's underachieved in San Jose. He had terrific teams there, and he couldn't get it done in San Jose. He went to Edmonton. He won one playoff series in his entire tenure there, which is, I guess, monumental if you're a part of the Oilers organization, which has been in shambles since their 2006 run. He didn't do so well, and then after the playoff run, what happened to the Oilers? Well, now they're terrible again. Well, I mean, at a certain point, you have to obviously look at Chiarelli, who was a major factor in that debacle, but it was also a big part of Tal McClellan's career there. He didn't do well, and now he's staying in the Pacific Division, now going the LA Kings, who, I mean, obviously underachieved this season, but they have a lot of aging players, a lot of bad contracts, and you're going to see Tal McClellan, I would wager, on the free agent market in a few years as well. Because what is there in LA that wasn't there in Edmonton or San Jose? You have aging players there. You don't have a McDavid in LA. You don't have. I mean, there's some good pieces in LA, but what is he expecting out of that core right now? They don't have a whole lot of cap maneuverability. They have Kovalchuk with that big contract. They have a lot of huge contracts down there, and they can't get rid of them even if they try. There's not a lot of maneuverability down there, and for Tal McClellan, I mean, he might get him a couple wins, but at the end of the day, what is he trying to accomplish? He's not going to win with that core. So for LA, they probably should have gotten an outside hire, someone like a Sheldon Keefe, like Coach Grew, who has coached the Syracuse Crunch to monumental victories, and they've been doing well in the postseason so far. I mean, they should have went for somebody else. And for AV, I mean, I'm a Rangers fan. There's I can't argue more negatively about AV than I have been. AV has been carried by Luongo in Vancouver, carried by Lundqvist in New York. He was the single biggest reason why the Rangers lost the series in Ottawa with this terrible deployment. All he does is chew his ridiculous gum all day long and doesn't actually make changes that benefits the team. He was the reason why Buchnevich had some serious confidence issues. He plays veterans that don't play well over young guys that need more ice time. He's that coach that'll play Andy McDonald top 4 minutes. He will do that. He's that kind of coach. And the Flyers made a terrible decision. The Kings made a terrible decision. But the Florida Panthers are probably going to be a surprise team to make the Eastern Conference Finals next season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that the Panthers, especially since you got to watch for the Panthers this summer, I'm telling you, they're going to be after Panarin and Bobrovsky. They might get both of them. So they're going to be not only those young players that they have, they might add on with those two pieces, along with Quenneville. You could be right that the Panthers are going to be knocking on a lot of doors next year. And I get what you're saying about AV. I used to really get on AV big time back in Vancouver because I was rooting for them those years. When they played the Bruins in the finals, like what he did that playoff, taking Luongo out and putting Schneider in, and taking Luongo out and putting Schneider in, I thought he did a real disservice to Roberto Luongo in that run, and I thought it was a bad job by AV. But it is what it is. What he did in New York, I know that he made some wrong moves. You want to say Lundqvist carried him there? That's fine. I got no problem with that. But he did win a lot of games there, and that's why the Flyers hired him.
Yeah, but in big moments, he doesn't do well. As you said, he lost a couple of finals. I mean, he blew a 3-1 lead. In three right. Was it 3-1, 3-2? I can't remember, but he blew a final lead. He didn't do well in New York when it came down to it. And if you're looking for that sort of thing in Philadelphia, well, then there's your guy.
They need some stability. They've been up and down for a long time. They're in 1 year, they're out 2, they're in 1, they're out 1. I think that the Flyers, they're not looking for a guy who's going to bring them to a Stanley Cup next year. I think the Flyers are looking for a guy who's going to get them back to, the Flyers making the playoffs consistently every year. I think that that's what they're looking for right now, and maybe he's the guy to do that.
Maybe. Who knows? Only time will tell. But as of now, I totally agree with you that Coach Q is the absolutely best hire of the coaching carousel as of April 18th. Mike, this has been an absolute pleasure. Super, super duper appreciate you taking the time to talk some hockey with me. Plug your social media, plug your podcast, plug anything you want. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Andrew. I really appreciate you having me on. At Carver High, CBS, you can hear me with Scott Farrell on Farrell on the Bench, Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. on CBS Sports Radio, coast to coast. And, of course, the ILC podcast. You can find it everywhere you listen to podcasts, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and, of course, at the homepage on ilspeak.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate you taking the time once again. I'll talk to you again real soon. Episode 45 of Chel Squared coming up next week. I'll talk to you then.